It's 1:01. The next session, we move to the action session, and it's the first one of the action session we'll be presenting before the lunch break. And I think we have, or we should have, Rob Knight online. So Rob, who is a professor at University of California in San Diego, together with Emma Rocke, who is with us from Marine Biology, University of Capetown. Emma, you want to introduce, or is Rob directly online? Okay, perfect. Let's see.
Hi. Let me see if I can share these slides.
Hey, Rob, we hear you and we have the slides. Thanks.
All right, great. All right, thanks, Joel. And yeah, sorry I can't be there in person. I'm in Chicago for a conflicting speaking engagement. Yeah, first off, thanks to Joel and Lita for organizing this amazing meeting, and to the rest of the organizing committee. So I'm co-presenting this with Emma Rocke from the University of Capetown, and I think she is there in person and will be coming up to take over after the fourth slide. So our working group is about environmental microbiomes and climate change, mapping our future. And as you heard just now, this is the first of the action ones, and this is informed in part by our work on the Earth Microbiome project and other large-scale initiatives that have been much more about seeing what's there and mapping the present. And so the ability to transition from the present to the future is quite exciting. So environmental microbiomes are at the front lines of a lot of different climate change impacts and solutions. And this wonderful summary by Capetown et al. In Nature Reviews Microbiology that goes through some of the many different ways that microbes are involved in both environmental impacts and could be modified to mitigate those environmental impacts. And these cover a lot of areas that either impact or are impacted by climate change, or both, including food security, ocean life, the climate support system, biodiversity, and ultimately maintaining the health of ecosystems for a healthy planet. Earth's landscape is also highly interconnected, and so when we think about these environmental problems, often they're not localized to one habitat and one geographic region, but the interconnectivity across those different regions really and different habitats really requires an integration not only of samples but also policy, of data, of geography, and of discipline. And a nice example is the Tijuana River ecological disaster happening in my own region of San Diego, where understanding what is going on there requires understanding the ocean, requires understanding the air, requires understanding transport inland, requires expertise from infectious disease and epidemiology, as well as from chemistry and from microbiology. Unfortunately, at the present, the research landscape is highly fragmented, and so what we see, especially when we want to when we want to do these large-scale data integrations, and this example is looking at total biomass within the Copipod database. What we want to see is this integration of policy, data, samples, geography, and discipline. But what we in fact see all too frequently is that it's highly fragmented into silos, making it very difficult to understand what is even there, let alone to be able to take action. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Emma to talk about One Health. Emma, are you there?
All right. So thanks to Rob and Pierre and Alice and Susan's segue into this working group, I think outline of what it is that we plan to do. And as Rob has just alluded to, and as I think there's a common thread throughout all of these presentations, the microbiome is integrally interconnected. I like to think of it as a sort of multicellular organism that works with us. But with the threat of climate change, there is a very real possibility that could turn against us. And I'm a marine microbiologist, so there will be slightly ocean-centric view to this. But of course, during the working group, we invite people from all disciplines to participate. But certainly in the deep ocean, we know more about the surface of Mars than we do in the deep ocean. And as Jim alluded to, in the deep ocean, there's a lot of it's a very unique ecosystem. The chemicals in which they find themselves is unique compared to the rest of the world. And we like to allude to the dark gene pool, which is huge. And there's enormous potential there, not only for bioprospecting, but also for climate regulation. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of research gaps that need to be addressed. And that's something that we'd like to address during this working group. I also, before I move on to the next slide, wanted to allude to, I've got a picture of some plastic and water here. The plastosphere is another growing concern. So the microbes growing on microplastics and indeed plastics in the ocean and probably on land as well are unique compared to the rest of the environment in which they find themselves, and then potentially get transported to further than they normally would. And we don't know what the effects of that are. All right. So this diagram has been shown many times. But I wanted to point, given that it's a working group, and we want to bring people together to try and address some of these issues that have been brought up this morning and early this afternoon. But I wanted to point to those 4 cogs in the middle of that diagram. So communication, collaboration, coordination, and capacity building. And I'd like to think that is the sort of core principles upon which we want to build this working group. So I wanted to segue quickly into the ocean. A few short weeks ago, the One Ocean Science Congress took place in Nice. And it was preceded by the One Ocean Science Congress. So there was the UN Ocean Conference before and a Science Congress before. And this was revolutionary and unique in the way that we had a week-long conference whereby we discussed ocean science. And those presentations and discussions and working groups and town halls fed directly into the UN Ocean Conference discussions and presentations and decisions that happen later on. So it's a great example of people within, obviously, the ocean realm, across disciplines, hugely geographically diverse, all came together with one common goal. And I think one of the successes coming out of that was the High Seas Treaty. The High Seas Treaty is looking at creating MPAs within the high seas, outside of the EEZ, areas of national jurisdiction, protecting genetic data, and creating and facilitating capacity building in the global south as well. There's a 30 commitment in the deep sea mining pause as well. So the High Seas Treaty came into that conference with 20 ratifications. We need 60. Post-conference, we had 50. So it's a good example of how if you bring people together in the right way, we can make a change. So I'm going to walk you through our 2-year goal and the roadmap that we envision within this working group. And ultimately, we want to build an integrated global network linking environmental microbiomes to climate change impacts and indeed solutions. So I'm going to walk you through the various pillars that we envisage. But essentially, I think the core of this is integrated data, and this has been touched on various presentations throughout this morning. We inevitably tend to work within silos, and this microbial data does exist, but in thousands of different silos. And I think the goal here is to try to merge those together. So we've got marine, freshwater, soil, atmosphere, and many, many others I'm sure that I've forgotten. But coming with a way to bring that together so that policymakers have an easier time of it. We need to come up with policies that are effective, and we need to come up with them quite quickly. I also wanted to touch on the CARE principle. So the FAIR principles are going to be touched on later on with another working group. But the CARE principles is a concept that's come up within the last couple of years. And essentially it refers to collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. So it's alluding to that socioeconomic question that came up earlier, but incorporating local communities, local cultures into these decisions from policy and funding all the way through research to implementation. And here we've got a good example of Maori culture whereby a company actually provided a two-way app. So local people were able to feed in data that they knew about and indigenous knowledge that could help answer questions that scientists perhaps didn't have access to. So that's a nice example of how that can be incorporated into a project moving forward. So our roadmap and priority actions, we'll start with a mapping and gap analysis. And we've been speaking a lot about missing microbiomes, about missing data. And we need to come together, look at, there is, like I said, there's a lot of data out there, and bringing it together, integrated portals, linking them together, flagship environmental survey data sets, of which there are a lot, and Rob just alluded to the San Diego Tijuana Rover Coastline project, and Pierre just spoke about the TREC project. And there's enormous power in these data sets and these initiatives, and the Tara initiative as a whole have done many expeditions over the last 10 years, and all of those protocols are the same. So we can do an expedition today and compare it to 10 years ago. And in the face of climate change and understanding how microbiomes are reacting in the face of climate change, this is hugely, hugely valuable. Sorry, I'm going to go back. And finally, I'm going to speak to the interoperability of multi-omics pipelines. This is an initiative that we're going to work in synergy with Working Group E, who we're going to speak a little bit later today. So I'm quickly going to touch on this, and I think hopefully this has become clear based on all of the presentations that have taken place so far. Environmental, microbe data from across sectors are connected. So, dream scenario would be to have data products that were intercomparable. So when you take it to the policy level, like I said, we can make decisions much more quickly and effectively and confidently. So this is the working group synergy partnership that has been decided upon. It's a joint action with Working Group E in collaboration with the MBL, IPCC. And then essentially we're going to start with the ocean, because that's something we're trying to do already, to coordinate the exploitation of ocean molecular data specifically, as was alluded to in a talk just recently, just before us. These omics protocols from sampling all the way down, all the way up to bioinformatics pipelines can change the answer to your scientific question depending on how you do it. So we need to decide on a common way to do this, certainly when we're speaking to policy. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the sort of mechanism whereby we foresee this working group moving forward. Research findings obviously are key. Engaging with stakeholders early and often, especially in the global south. I think the second slide that Rob spoke to, there was a map there of data points for plankton recorders in the world, and there's a huge gap in the south. We have less resources, but there's 70% or 80% ocean in the south compared to 60 in the north. So that's something that is another gap that needs to be plugged. But interacting with these big policy platforms, UN Decade of Ocean Science, CBD, UNFCCC, SDGs, and aligning stakeholder priorities and science funding policy outputs with funder agendas from the beginning is really important. And this hopefully will ensure continuity. We recently, through a collaborative H2020 project, there's a bunch of us doing projects in the Atlantic. We invited stakeholders in South Africa to the table. It wasn't at day one, it was maybe day 10, so sort of mid-project, but they were so thankful to be invited at the beginning of the project and not at the end of it. Rather than being handed a bunch of recommendations that scientists had decided upon, they were thankful that they were in the room with us during our process, and we had some really fruitful discussions. So I think that's key as well. So synergies across working groups, a bit like the microbiome. I think we're all interconnected, and there are many more synergies after listening to all these talks than I have put up on this slide. I think interoperability of data is key. I think metadata is something to certainly work on with the working group E. There's agricultural ecosystems and climate stress. Climate is affecting land and agriculture as much as it is the oceans. South-South and North-South partnerships is really key, and it's something I'd really like to push for personally. And then there's climate-driven emergent pathogen emergence. So there is, with climate change, we're finding more pathogens, certainly in coastal ocean areas and within rivers, and that's something that needs to be addressed as well. Okay, so to finish up quite early. Sorry. So I lost the slide. Okay. All right, so to sum up, this working group requires breadth across sectors, so we need working groups, and this is a call to action to everyone online and everyone in this room, not everyone in this room. If you're interested in being a part of this working group, we need sectors across the board, geographically across the board, to participate and make this a truly meaningful working group. So the QR code here will send you a survey. If you do have 3 minutes to answer it, if you are interested in joining this working group, there's some preliminary questions in there that I came up with, along with a sort of comment section at the bottom. So please, we need your input. This is one point of view and one approach that I've come up with, and I know there are many, many other opinions in the room and online and beyond. And this is something we'd like to collate before our first meeting going forward. Thank you.
So the questionnaire is designed to evaluate whether anyone is relevant to the working group. Yeah, okay. Thanks, that's a nice way to go. Any questions from the room? Yes?
Yeah, I have a very naive question. Could we have an action to include the microbiome topics into the COP conferences? The COP30 or this type
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I'm not aware, or I'm not sure that they're talking about that.
Not yet, no.
Which is quite surprising.
It is surprising, yes. And that's absolutely one of the...
I think the next one is in Amazonia in Brazil, so
yeah.
It could be interesting to add
Absolutely.
some of these topics.
Thank you, yes.
I think it's part of the strategy of the lineup of your roadmap, but do you already have ideas of where in climate change microbiomes could best have a role?
Yeah. Sorry, was a question?
Do you have an idea of where among all the aspects of climate change microbiomes could be leveraged?
I think across all... Rob, do you want to answer this?
Sure. I think the question is where the most immediate impact could be with microbes and climate change. I think there are some relatively low-hanging fruit around, for example, reducing methane emissions from livestock, and which is a big climate driver, and also incorporating into climate models, especially around soil microbiology, having a more detailed understanding of the complex interplay that microbes have on that system, rather than just looking at biomass and assuming that microbes are all the same. I think there's also quite a lot of opportunity for understanding the permafrost better, where, for example, Janet Jansen has done a lot of exciting work looking at the impact of climate change, lightning strikes, and then the interplay between fire building up more refractory carbon versus releasing more CO2 directly. And that's a huge issue because you're talking about something like a petagram of carbon locked up in that reserve. So in addition to the ocean work that Pierre talked about, I think those are a few of the key opportunities right now. I also think microbes are very important for monitoring, and we had a meeting with representatives of IUCN in San Diego a few weeks ago, talking about how to integrate microbes into the SSC framework. for example, for the Red List. And I think there's an increased appreciation at the UN for how microbes can be incorporated across different programs. So that certainly offers a lot of exciting possibilities at the moment.
Okay, thanks much. Question here?
Yeah,
Jim?
so thank you both. Clearly, there's so much to be learned from these marine environments. I was struck by Pierre's talk of Pierre describing the trek, and you mentioned it, coastline projects as well as marine. There's so much, though, yet to understand. You know, I was looking at Chenadal's manuscript here, and I guess they've constructed this, what they're calling GOMC, or Global Ocean Microbiome Genome Catalog, and they've tapped into publicly available information, the Ocean Microbiomics Database and Ocean DNA. How, are you going to tap into that as well as part of this working group effort?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are many of those databases out there, and that's one of those things that we need to, rather than having isolated efforts, and then the whole purpose behind the WMP as well is to bring those efforts together, rather than having isolated efforts. But absolutely, yes.
Any more questions? If not, we will stop it here and move for lunch. You have a... Oh, we would like to take a picture of the room. On the stairs. Oh, okay. So the proposition is that we all move to the stairway and for a picture. But before, we should thank the presenters.